it's going to be kind of interesting because we haven't, have we, Ed, collaborated at all, Vivian, with what we're going to say. So it's going to be, I think it's going to be kind of interesting. And if you've seen me during this session, I've been scribbling away my notes, yeah? So if this isn't as polished as a normal sort of Bolton wang, yeah? Forgive me, yeah? I'm trying to read my own writing, yeah? But for me, personally, yeah, hugely useful event. With Jack having David in the back here, the conversations going on is different for me. And I go to an awful lot of the great leaders of Geo, of Europe and of the world. But I think with the topics we've touched on today, there's been new conversations in the room here. So congratulations to you all for doing that. And now listen to my complete misrepresentation of the conversation that you thought was going on. So for me, it is about geofutures, right? So it's about a useful lens on that future. And clearly this is my own personal view, right? This is not, I'm not documenting history here. I'm not trying to provide some sort of comprehensive overview. It's what was resonating for me that I'm going to take back to Ordnance Survey and plough into our work. And for me, there were three themes here, okay? Three themes of data in the future. I'll describe a bit more about what I mean by that. Map making in the future, which was a big discussion over on table A earlier. And then visualization in the future. So those are my three buckets. So starting with the first of those. Well, it's clear from the presentations we heard today, and stuff we know anyway, that data is changing. Yeah? Various speakers, and I'm sorry if I don't, by the way, attribute all of these quotes to the right sets of speakers, but if you hear your words, just take pride that they were your words, and all I'm doing is repeating them. Persistent sensing, we heard about that. We heard about persistent sensing from new sets of sensors, where we expect all those sensors to be readily fused together. We expect the data to be in real time. We talked about the latency revolution, self-updating maps, and shifting towards that real time. A much greater use of automation as part of that. And then just to make it even harder, with intermittent GNSS. Yeah? So more data that's coming and going, that needs to be real time. That's a different operating environment. And I think that's an environment then that for me only underlines the need for data provenance. And if we didn't hear that expression once, we heard it 1,000 times, and rightly so. That provenance matters. Integrity, trust. We talked about pixel passports, which I quite like the idea of. That need to be verifiable. To watermark our data, Simon talked about. And in some ways, of course, we're sourcing that data now from a much wider variety of sources. Citizens will co-create the data. Yeah? Ed talked about we'll all become cartographers. And then there's the rise of fake data that Mark talked about from Swiss Top on the video. That's not really very straightforward, right? If you really want to know how to be clear about the provenance of data, produce it through one pipeline, test it on the way out, stick stamp on it, and away we go. And that worked fine for Ordnance Survey for about 220 years. That isn't the way that we stick to that today. And so whatever we do in responding to that data, we need to make sure we're aware of the importance of provenance in that world. At the same time, the sort of third aspect I heard about data was about how do we get all of the data, so from a wide range of sources. In other words, there won't just be a singular source for this. ONS data is as important as OS's data, is as important as EA's data or climate data, or data from across our organisations. From a wide variety of sources, we've still got to get that into the right shape. Definitely for humans, and the unfurling of the map, humans absorbing those visualisations, for humans to work with, but equally for machines to work with, and then just to complicate it even more, for humans and machines to work alongside each other together. There's a little sidebar, I told my table this. I spent, and again, you're about to learn something about me, this is called oversharing, and this is why I don't go to dinner parties anymore, because my wife says, it's time to leave, Nicholas. I spent the weekend, I grow vegetables, okay, in my spare time, not professionally. I grow data professionally, I grow vegetables in an amateur way. And if anybody who grows vegetables, anybody? Okay, so you all know, and you can explain to your colleagues on your tables, that it's an optimization problem. Yeah? When do I need to prepare the ground? At what time? When do I need to therefore plant the first sowing of the peas in order that I get peas in a regular rotation with the second? I love this nodding I'm getting from this table here. The second sowing of the peas. When should I put in the coriander? Because coriander doesn't like being transplanted. Yeah? Or when should I put in this fragile crop? You've got to wait till the final frost to put it in. And equally, you shouldn't harvest your your parsnips until the frost has come back, because that's where the sugar comes from. So that's an optimization problem. So normally what I do is I get an Excel spreadsheet and I put, I know. Yeah. I get an Excel spreadsheet and I put what I'm going to put in each bed. So I know I've got my sheet from last year, so I can do crop rotation on there, make sure I'm exchanging right nutrients. And this is relevant, by the way, this isn't just me wanging it on. I thought, well, why don't I use a large language model this year, right? Because actually the great thing about that is they're not thumbing through an RHS book on vegetable growing or Charles Darwin's book on no-dig gardening. Yeah? Effectively, it knows all that stuff. So 2 hours later, I've got this amazing plan, right? It's an amazing plan, which I've clearly, I need an indexing system. I've used north, south, east, west, because I had to tell the thing which beds we were in, which sunlight arrangements and so forth. I've used an indexing system so that I've got rows and columns. Again, I'm oversharing here. And I've now got this week-by-week plan about what I should be doing when. And so having done all of this and then planted bed 4.1, I can show you pictures, with the first set of peas and then the spinach that runs down both sides, I took a picture of it. And I took a picture of it and I sent it up to the large language model, at which I got praise back. Yeah. Oh, Nick, you've done so well in the regular planting of those peas and of that spinach. But remind me, have you planted those on the west end or the east end of the bed for your first planting? So effectively there's me sort of interacting with it. I'm describing my beds. It's built up a map of that data, right, of that world. And now it feels that the photograph I took, it couldn't tell was I taking it from the west looking east or the east looking west. So had you prepared data for me to now have that cooperation between human and machine for productive purpose? And I don't mean to make myself more vegetables. I'm talking about industrial scale agriculture. I'm talking about all those industries that could be revolutionised in that way. So data preparation for machines is one thing, data preparation for humans is another thing, and then there's this weird grey area, this twilight zone somewhere in between the two. If you are really interested in my vegetable patch, I will show you the week-by-week plan. I can really, really thoroughly recommend it. Anyway, data, that's the first one, okay? I wouldn't have told you that story had I not got more time, all right? The second one is this idea of map making is changing, yeah? And you sort of heard me talk about this earlier. And I think for me, the challenge, which I think is a good one, is we have to break the idea of what a map is today. And in some ways, break that link between maps and visualizations, which I'll come back to later on. Because some maps themselves, where is he, will be data structures. Someone said that to me. I can't see. Maybe that. Anyway, will be data structures. And that's still okay, yeah? It doesn't have to necessarily manifest itself. And although I love maps, and anybody who knows me knows that paper maps will be here for a very long time. Thank you, William. I bought a map print business just last year, yeah? I did. But that means then, I think when we think about map making, we may not need to agree what a map is. Maybe that's moot. Maybe the most important thing we actually agree about. What are those techniques by which we create those artifacts? And I would hope that the map maker of 1791 actually has a lot in common with the people in this room, even though the tools are different, the methods are different, the data sourcing is different, etc. So that was my second takeaway. My third one is written in pencil over here, which I can't really quite read, but it's about visualization is changing. Richard talked about visualization, came up throughout the AGI report. We talked about the need for new ways to do visualization for complex infrastructure projects. And Swiss Topo Mark talked about more augmented reality, more AR. And And in that world, for me, the thing about augmented reality, and that's the world I've come from, right? So that's the sort of industry I was involved with before I joined Ordnance Survey. Augmented reality has always been pitched as this idea of a very visually oriented experience, right? So we're going to buy, what is it, £2.5 grand, £3 grand, the Apple headset, and we're going to trick the visual cortex into thinking, you know, to suspend disbelief and think you're actually walking along the plank. If you've ever done I can't remember what it was, so we walk along the plank, there's a kitten on the end, have you ever done that? Yeah, and people genuinely experience vertigo and they lose their balance, they all fall off, even though they're on absolute level ground. I've got a nod over here. You've done it? I've done it. Yeah, so the way it works is you walk in, you put the headset on, you walk into what you think is a lift, the lift goes up, you don't feel any sensation of lift. There are much better VR and AR experiences that do it. And then lo and behold, the doors open and you're standing on the edge of a skyscraper, there's just a plank out in front of you, and there's a little kitten at the end mewling at you to ask for help. And it's your job to tiptoe across the plank, to pick the kitten up. And more invariably, everybody falls off the plank, yeah? Even though you know it's all made up. Anyway, that's been the focus, right, on this visual cortex, which, you know, should play to us. However, if you look at Apple's traction, it's not happening, nor did it happen with Magic Leap, yeah? And nor did it happen with Google Glass. But what is getting traction is the Meta glasses. Is everyone familiar with those things? And of course, the Meta glasses, in lots of ways, they are very visually light in some ways, but potentially there are other senses that they're leveraging. So, and the example of that is Apple. So, Apple have done spatial audio, right? So, if you own a pair of Apple AirPods and you see them all down the street, that's a form of AR, right? Spatial audio is just, you know, tricking your oral cortex rather than the visual cortex, yeah? And so, what does that then mean? If visualization is changing, what does that mean then for us? You may have seen some of the projects for, I think it was out of Oxford. Did anyone ever see that? Glasses with some sort of spatial awareness sensor on the front, and it helped the visually impaired navigate through a town. And it would whisper, you know, in your ear as you're walking along, stop here, there's a pedestrian crossing, there's a man walking with a dog, and to your right, head slightly to the left, etc. And so, that, you know, that's directions. It's not a map, but it is a visual. It is a non-visual visualization. What are they called? An experience, maybe. Yeah. And so maybe we need to think more about that, or even give it a slightly different term. It's not just about the visualization; it's the experience for the intent that we've got with the data and the capability that we're trying to undertake. And then while we're there, this is sort of Nick on having a bit of beef. While we're there. We shouldn't think about, I don't think we should think about visualization as a separate exercise, something that happens, you know, at the very end of the chain. And I say that really because it's not an independent activity. And if you go back up the chain, so if you think about, you know, you survey and then you analyse it in some way, even when you get to the point of analysis you haven't got quite the right data for it, what you do is you step back and do some more capture or sourcing of the data. And in the same way that if when you do a visualization, first of all, and I'm sure all of the visualization folks from Ordnance Survey will recognise this, you build the thing and then you go, oh, it's not right. It would be so much better if I just had data set A, B or C. And so you then go back to actually, can I take a source data set, analyse that in order to build that? It's not, although the value chain, and I talked about this at our table, has now been segmented. Yeah, we're no longer a vertically integrated national mapping agency. The actual steps themselves are as interdependent as they have ever been. And so what I worry about is when you deal with the visualization as a separate stage, it ends up diminishing it as some sort of afterthought. In other words, it seems the colouring in that happens, yeah? And yet, it's that colouring in that makes the very good useful to somebody to create the insight. And I can't remember who it was when we were talking about this, about, you know, it's all very well having all of the greatest data and having everything left of that process that creates that product by which I can make a decision. But effectively, this itself isn't what people want, right? What you want is the insight, right? Inside Ordnance Survey, what do I talk about? People don't want data, they want insights, yeah? People don't want quarter-inch drill bits, they want quarter-inch holes. And so we have to demand what's needed from this end, and all the rest of that gets organised to whoever it is we're trying to inform, alert, understand, whatever that decision needs to be made. So then, that's it, really. Bringing those three things together, for me, to build that sort of full pathway, because we are now living in this segmented value chain world, none of us can do this alone. And this isn't the bit where the CEO wangs on, wouldn't it be great if we all just collaborated more and so forth. Genuinely, we've all got different sets of expertise across that spectrum, and that what we have to do as a community is work together to make sure that the data folks up here, when I sit up here, are doing everything we need for the analysis folks, for the visualization folks, to make sure that we deliver those outcomes for people at that level. So collectively, and I want to leave you with this thought, Richard talked about AGI call for collaboration. Collectively we are map makers, and I'll die on that hill, and fragmented we're nothing.